Shapeshifters! N.D. Stevenson's graphic novel masterpiece Nimona was recently nominated for Best Animated Feature Film at both the upcoming Academy Awards and Annie Awards in 2024. Back when I originally wrote this video, the writers and actor strikes were in full swing, and out of respect for them, I couldn't release it at the time. But now that my favorite movie of 2023 is up for multiple exciting awards, I'm so excited to finally talk about Nimona with y'all. Not only is it visually stunning, super hilarious, and filled with powerful themes, Nimona's creator and the creative team behind the movie had to fight shark tooth and rusty floorboard nail to get it made. And it's truly the definition of a labor of love, blood, and tears. So today, I'm breaking down Nimona to cover everything you need to know about the making of this film and all the little details you might have missed. You're watching Whitney Vision, and this is Nimona Explained. This is your spoiler warning! If you haven't seen Nimona yet, hit pause on this video and come back once you've opened the hearts and minds of a medieval futuristic kingdom. I'll also be talking about the Nimona graphic novel, so if you want to read that without any spoilers, turn back now. It's impossible to talk about Nimona without going over its real-life story, which is fascinating, empowering, and full of as much heartbreak and triumph as the movie itself. So let's start at the beginning. In 2012, N.D. Stevenson was a 19-year-old illustration student at the Maryland Institute College of Art when he published Nimona as a webcomic. Nate's original idea for Nimona was a character he created in high school named Nightshade, who had no default state. She had truly unlimited control over her own body, and she could turn into any person, anything, any creature, with really no limitations, he said to the LA Times. Interestingly, Nate was also inspired to create Nimona by shape-shifting bounty hunter Zam Wessel, who dies within the first 5 minutes of Attack of the Clones. He told Deadline that he really imprinted on Zam as an 8-year-old, and that although no one remembers her, he believes his life's mission has been to make everyone care about her. One of Batman's comic sidekicks, Carrie Kelly, a plucky heroine who becomes the new Robin in 1986's The Dark Knight Returns, was another one of his inspirations for Nimona's character. In 2015, Nimona was published as a graphic novel. The adaptation rights were also sold to 20th Century Fox in 2015, and its subsidiary Blue Sky Studios was supposed to produce an animated feature film based on Nate's original story. After Disney acquired Fox in 2019, production continued with directors Nick Bruno and Troy Quay joining the team in 2020. Unfortunately, the pandemic ruined everything, and Disney shut down Blue Sky Studios in 2021, icing Nimona along with it. But cost-cutting didn't seem to be the only reason for the movie's cancellation. According to 3 anonymous insiders, Disney leadership took issue with Nimona's same-sex kiss through its production. Homophobia is alive and well in a lot of parts of the world, and it appears that the mouse didn't want to risk alienating a toxic portion of their fan base that would get mad over a gay kiss between 2 consenting adult men. We've seen it happen before. Several countries banned a line from Onward where the Cyclops cop says it gets better, as well as the 2 women kissing in celebration at the end of Rise of Skywalker. And those are just 2 of the many examples from the last decade. There are a lot more. But even though the film was seemingly dead, the passion to put out this story burned on. Former Blue Sky creatives refused to give up, forming a temporary company called Shapeshifter Productions. With the help of Annapurna Pictures, Netflix, and DNEG Animation, Nimona's team was able to swoop in and save and complete their film. Nate told The Gamer that, "It felt like when production was at its hardest, when the movie was over, when it was dead and there was no hope, that spirit and the way everyone connected to the character personally carried us through. Even when it seemed it was absolutely over and there was no chance, it still seemed like nobody wanted to stop fighting, and they didn't." The best Easter egg in the film is hands down this billboard in the kingdom that reads "Blue Sky Never Dies," with a crude drawing of a mouse in the upper right-hand corner. Obviously, this is a dig at Mickey Mouse for not believing in Nimona as much as the creatives did. Animator Nastya Garadchenko tweeted out the image, confirming that they were the ones to draw this missable detail. Although Nate came out as trans and non-binary in 2020, he now feels that writing Nimona's character may have been a subconscious reflection of an identity he didn't fully understand at the time he initially wrote it. In an interview with Animation World, he said, "Part of what makes it fun to look back at is that I do see myself maybe figuring things out before I was ready to have them figured out." Nate told The Hollywood Reporter, quote, "She's a character with a lot of pain and anger at her heart, and that's why she exists. When I made her, I was doing it for my own catharsis." Nimona's queer and trans representation is the heart of the film, stemming from a desire to provide a relatable character to anyone who would otherwise feel alone. It's a love letter to all those who are misunderstood, and there are people who felt very passionate about it and connected to those themes, people of the LGBTQ+ community in particular. We needed to embrace the Nimona-ness of the film, Nick Bruno said to the LA Times. Nimona's original story was also inspired by Nate's disconnection from Christianity. He told The Hollywood Reporter, "At the time, I had just left the church, so leaving the church for me was not just leaving Christianity as a faith, although I did that as well. It was also leaving behind the evangelical conservative upbringing that I had been raised with. As a young adult, he was beginning to question everything he'd learned so far in life. Questioning authority and standing up in the face of injustice isn't just punk rock ideology. It's a vital part of growing as a person, discovering who you are, and becoming more empathetic to the world around you as you learn." But although Nimona's characterization and story is so personal to N.D. Stevenson, he always knew that the source material would have to change certain elements, creating an entirely new story for a film audience. He told NPR, "I always knew that things were going to change about the story, and that they should change because I made the comic that I set out to make, and now it was going to become something new. It was going to do its own little shapeshift, if you will, and become a whole new thing. And a whole new thing it has become." So let's get into the similarities and differences between the graphic novel and the movie, because a lot of these updates and adaptations are actually really interesting to see side by side. For starters, the tone of the comic is a lot different than the high-energy animated feature. It's way more violent and morally ambiguous, and definitely skews for an older audience. Ballister Boldheart's name was originally Ballister Blackheart in the comics, and is more of an anti-hero than the moral paragon Boldheart. Where Boldheart is more interested in truth, honor, and other classic knight stuff, Blackheart is obsessed with science and has an easier time leaning into the title of villain. He still fights the good fight, but he isn't opposed to injuring innocents as a mean to effect great change. He purposefully gives food poisoning to the kingdom to sow discontent and make the public question the institution's secret use of dangerous materials. To be fair to Blackheart, he only intends minor and temporary harm, but if he was in our world, he'd be facing several felony counts. Although both Ballisters are pushed towards a life of villainy after being kicked out of knighthood, Blackheart is steered towards the dark side after losing his arm to Goldenloin, while Boldheart is framed for killing the queen and loses an arm in one fell swoop. In the same way that the director swapped out Boldheart's weapon for a deadly laser sword, comic Goldenloin's lance was also swapped out at the director's behest for a jousting competition. This high-powered lance was triggered by Goldenloin in a mix of frustration and jealousy after losing to Blackheart, and it blew off Blackheart's arm. The resulting disability barred Blackheart from being a knight, and he was outcasted by the institution that he had dedicated his life to. Speaking of Goldenloin, it's really cool to see the way that his character was altered. In the comics, Goldenloin is basically a mashup of Todd and Ambrosius from the film. So he's kind of a himbo douchebag, but he also has this romantic tension thing with Ballister. But it also exists subtextually and is never fully explored. The first thing he does is shoot Ballister's arm off and refuses to apologize, and so they've had this terrible breakup. That's what the comic is. It's broken hearts and the refusal to apologize. A relationship that is almost beyond saving, it seems, Nate told The Hollywood Reporter. Most of comic Goldenloin's arc is him learning to take responsibility for the harm he's caused Ballister, and admitting to Bal and himself that the incident was more than an accident. There's another noticeable change you might have already caught. Goldenloin's lost his luscious locks. Although they kept the character's blonde hair from Nate's original design, they updated Ambrosius Goldenloin's character design to look more like his South Korean voice actor, Eugene Lee Yang. A pretty major change to Goldenloin is his upbringing. His character being a Nepo baby and a direct descendant of Glorith is a key part of the movie. But in a holiday special in the comics, it's revealed that both he and Ballister grew up as poor, underprivileged orphans. He actually gets bullied similar to how Boldheart gets bullied by a nameless character that looks like the proto-version of Todd. Nimona's character makes some interesting alterations from the comics. Like her movie counterpart, this girl does not battle ash at killing, only it's dialed up to 11. Not only does she incinerate several knights, but she's the one that kills the kingdom's monarch. Instead of a queen dying early on, Nimona takes out the king in her end-of-novel rampage. Also, she absolutely fries the institution's director intentionally. In addition to being a lot more violent, comic Nimona's backstory isn't the same. Like the movie giving us two backstories for Nimona, the comic similarly has two conflicting origin stories. The fake one that Nimona shares with Blackheart involves her being granted powers by a witch, powers she uses to protect her village from raiders. Unfortunately, she gets stuck in her shapeshifted form and they turn on her. When she learns to control her powers, she's too late and everyone has died. Her more accurate backstory is given later in the comic. This story has a bit of ambiguity, so there are two readings of Nimona's origins. If we take the word of these knights in a flashback as fact, Nimona was a shape-shifting monster that found a family with a sick daughter. When the daughter died, Nimona replaced her. Over time, the parents questioned Nimona's true nature, claiming that their now healthy daughter was an imposter. Out of fear of Nimona's shapeshifting, they delivered her to the authorities, who performed experiments on her. The other reading, and the one that I subscribe to, is that Nimona was never replaced and was always the family's daughter. While this doesn't fully explain how a girl could develop magical shapeshifting, it does reflect the queer and trans experiences that influence the character. Nimona suddenly recovering from her illness is used as an excuse by her parents to explain why their daughter is different, and it gives them a convenient degree of separation that they can use to disown her. It's a lot like when LGBTQ people come out to their families and are told that they're wrong about their own identity, that they weren't this person when they were younger, and that they're just going through a phase. Often, this is because parents are selectively remembering their child's experiences and projecting their own desires onto them. For some people, it's easier to convince themselves that a demon replaced their baby than to open their worldview. You'll notice that both of these backstories are missing Glorith. Actually, Glorith's character is a lot more low-key in the graphic novel overall. While she's a larger-than-life, ever-looming presence in the movie, she's more of a legendary figurehead on the page. Glorith and Nimona's relationship looked a lot different in the comics as well. In the movie, the two girls were BFFs until the other villagers became afraid of Nimona. But in the comics, we're only told that Glorith once found a serpent that couldn't be killed by sword or arrow. Stevenson did say that the relationship we see between Nimona and Glorith came from an idea he had for the comic back when he was writing it, but that he ended up leaving it on the cutting room floor. So this makes me think that comic Nimona was likely emotionally betrayed by Glorith in her past as well. The comics also more thoroughly explain Nimona's powers. It's stated that she can turn into any existing animal or person, and although she can turn into fictional people, it's a bit more difficult. Turning into an inanimate object would render her inanimate as well, which means that in neither the movie nor the comic do they explain how Nimona is able to easily transform into a gigantic cereal mascot and fire cereal bites seemingly made of her own body into a crowd of knights. Seriously, I need to know how she's able to do this because it's a wild trick, even for a shapeshifter. I know the answer is magic, but I want to learn more about the science of that magic. Interestingly, Nimona can also split into two forms, and this becomes a key part of the graphic novel's climax. When her blood is taken by the institution, she's able to shape change into a second body. Unfortunately, this splits parts of her psyche, and the weaker half of the two ends up dying shortly after the duplication. Prior to this, her blood is scanned and looks to be normal human blood, hinting that the magic that Nimona uses to transform causes her to perfectly mimic a creature's atomic structure. She also has Wolverine levels of regeneration, allowing her to reanimate from death. There's also a nearly identical scene to the one where she's shot in the leg with an arrow in the comics, although she plays up the pain to not freak out Blackheart. This is just a minor difference, but it has to be mentioned. In the graphic novel, Nimona hates anchovies on pizza, but in the movie, she's grossed out by pineapple on a slice of za. There's also a subplot in the comics that involves a scientist named Meredith Blitzmeyer who studies the overlap between magic and science, and inadvertently creates a magic-absorbing device that's able to prevent Nimona from shapeshifting. If the creators ever decide to make a sequel, I think this could be a really interesting challenge for Nimona and Boldheart to overcome. Plus, she's a fun character, even if the world is burning down. Blitzmeyer is dedicated to focusing on her scientific projects. Moving on to the director from the comics, this version is much more of a militaristic, power-hungry general than a straight-up traditionalist. She seeks to capture Nimona in order to experiment on her so that she can find uses for her powers, like creating weapons or upgrading her soldiers. She's also experimenting with the super illegal and highly dangerous jade root, a substance used by dark sorcerers that's capable of making powerful, highly corrosive magic weapons. Jade root also has the nasty habit of poisoning the soil and agriculture of the kingdom, but the director doesn't care about what harm she brings upon her peasants. Although jade root isn't mentioned by name in the film, anytime you see tech that glows green in the movie, they're likely being powered by this stuff. Most fascinating of all, however, is that the original story implies that the director is a monster herself, based on her very, very pointy ears and the fact that Nimona refers to her as a goblin in one panel. The director even takes 3 panels to dodge Nimona's accusations. Some readers interpret that the director's actually a self-hating monster who rejects her true self, stuffing it down and compensating for it by perpetuating a system of bigotry and oppression. Nimona, on the other hand, outright rejects monster versus human propaganda and embraces their differences. This reading makes the director a pretty good foil for Nimona, as she's an example of the real monster, the heartless monster Nimona could become if she gave in to the pressure of conformity and rejected her truth. It's a bit of a stretch, but I actually think that there might be hints that the director in the movie is also bottling up self-hatred. Obviously, her ears are hidden, but there's more than this. I totally acknowledge that this is a bit of a headcanon, but it aligns with the Goblin theory. When the director speaks about warning the queen about letting Boldheart train to be a knight, she seems to speak from a degree of intimate familiarity with the queen, almost as if she was the queen's lover. This could explain the adaptation choosing to replace the king with a queen who's featured more prominently. Even though the in-text world of movie Nimona is homophobia-free, we all know that the themes deal heavily with homophobia. My theory is that the director represents internalized homophobia and that she has a complex relationship with the queen that mirrors Boldheart and Goldenloins. The director's self-hatred comes from her upbringing within a society that actively celebrates the slaying of monsters and adheres to ancient traditions. The dreams she's had since she was little of the castle's walls coming down and the monsters taking over aren't prophecies. They're her subconscious fearing that her true self will break through the walls she puts up. Like Nimona says, suppressing her nature to shape change feels like death, so it isn't far-fetched to imagine that a closeted director is exhibiting stress-related dreams. Being a fundamentalist to the culture set by Glorith, the director would likely hate that the queen would betray tradition by allowing Boldheart to be knighted. To her, this is a slippery slope, and if one thing changes, then other things could change, and possibly everything she spent her life stuffing down and putting behind a wall could come down, and the world would see her for a monster. So she begs her friend and possibly romantic partner to not break tradition, and when that doesn't work, she feels a level of betrayal similar to how Goldenloin feels about Boldheart killing the queen, and how Boldheart feels about Goldenloin hunting him. So she sets out to betray the queen back, and in the process breaks up Goldenloin and Boldheart. This makes her a foil to these heroes in the same way she'd be a foil to Nimona. She was unable to accept the queen's decisions, and instead of dealing with the emotions that come with this conflict in a healthy way, she chose to drive a laser sword through her queen. Contrast this with Boldheart, who refuses to harm Goldenloin in the way that Goldenloin harmed him, and with Goldenloin, who admits that he's on the wrong side and that his side is hurting someone he loves. Those are just some of the major differences between the two mediums, but we gotta talk about all of the rad similarities. So many scenes were lifted straight from N.D. Stevenson's graphic novel, and despite all the changes made to the story to be more modern and kid-friendly, the movie drew heavily from its source material. For example, I love that they carried over Nimona's shark persona, as well as the creepy little boy she changes into. He's named Gregor in the comics, and later Blackheart takes the name as an alias. Likewise, when Nimona takes on the role of NYC's urban hero Pizza Rat, it's a sly reference to the rat she paints pink in the comics to trick Goldenloin. Nimona's murder board drawings are true to the comic form of her battle plans. The scene where Ballister and Nimona watch a creepy zombie movie together is also lifted straight from the graphic novel. The only slight change being that on the page, Nimona's terrified of the undead, and Blackheart has scientific hang-ups with the movie's logic. One of my favorite moments in the movie, when our two villains play their in-universe version of Monopoly until Nimona breathes fire on the table, also happened in the comics. Here, the game is called World Domination, and it even features the same Scotty Dog token that Nimona plays with in the movie. This scene is perhaps the most direct from the page sequence in the whole film. The scene where Nimona gets shot in the leg with an arrow and heals at a relatively fast pace is also ripped from the pages of the graphic novel. Although, comic Nimona plays up her pain and keeps her regeneration on the DL for a bit longer. But comic references might not be all you've missed. Nimona has tons of fun background details that the artist put in for giggles. First up, we have a billboard advertising Slayerade, an obvious play on Gatorade that several knights are advertising just like real-world athletes do. A few moments later, we see an Archerade billboard that's apparently marketed towards bow and arrow guys only. As far as in-universe businesses go, we catch a few names of restaurants and other companies in the kingdom, such as Chainmail, which I assume is their postal service, Bash Skewer, The Scorching Cauldron, Helmets, KTV News, The Octopi Cafe, Jester Jabs, Monster Burger, Heavy Metal, Uncle Jim's Pizza, Royal Burger, Hollow Leaf, the inversion universe of Apple, Brawny Ale, K-Net Cellular Service, Den's Chili Bar, Verminators, and Lancelot. There's also the Antlered Serpent, the same bar where Blackheart and Goldenloin met up in secret in the comic. In the beginning of the movie, when the Squire attempts to talk to Ballister before the knighting ceremony, you can see the beginning of the video he took of himself trying on Bal's armor, and the Queen sabotaging Bal's lance, pulled up on his phone. On rewatch, it's pretty noticeable that he wanted to tell Boldheart something but was stopped before he could warn him. When the ceremony kicks off, we see 3 cheering crowd members wearing yellow, blue, and pink, aka the colors of the pansexual pride flag. As Nimona walks through the streets of the kingdom committing petty acts of vandalism, she's listening to the song Girl Like by Dope St. Jude via her headphones. A few moments later, we see Ballister crafting his new metal arm while also listening to the song on the radio. He turns it off when he hears Nimona knock at the door. Because both characters were actually listening to the song on their respective music devices in the movie, this is an example of diegetic sound. But it's only the first of many. Later on, when Nimona cooks breakfast tacos for Ballister, she also listens to Go by Santigold featuring Karen O on her Walkman. When the 2 criminals arrive at the subway platform, there's a guy on the saxophone playing Careless Whisper by George Michaels. During the Quispy Dragon Quisp cereal commercial, the Tra-La-La song, aka One Banana, Two Banana by the Banana Splits, plays in the background of the ad. Breaking the Law by Judas Priest plays when the salesperson turns on the hover car that Ballister's trying to hide in. And lastly, Gold Guns Girls by Metric plays as Shark Nimona and Ballister do their victory groove down. Here, they're pulling moves straight out of Risky Business and The Breakfast Club. A couple of songs on the soundtrack are non-diegetic, like when All Right, Here's My Fist, Where's the Fight by Sahara Hot Nights plays during Nimona's first on-screen Rhino rampage, or when Because I'm Awesome by the Dolly Roots plays during one of their epic night fights. A newspaper with the headline Queen Killer Still at Large hangs nearby on the murder board, and there's a picture of Thawd with sticky notes that read Primary Suspect and Motive. The Institute Herald also reported on the Queen's death, writing an article about the kingdom mourning her loss. But this newspaper headline is even cooler. It says Blackheart out there, a nod to Boldheart's original name from the comics. We also see a diagram of Ballister's sword that reads Queen Killer, the sword of Ballister Blackheart. When Nimona kindly updates Ballister's murder board for him, she includes her own flair, like this cry to disrupt the system, labeling Ambrosius Nemesis, and hanging drawings of her various animal forms fighting with Ballister. Back in town, we find a little boy riding one of those coin-operated carousels that you see outside of grocery stores and old-timey barbershops. In the future, however, Monster Killer is super high-tech, featuring a hologram sword with which to stab hologram monsters. Not only is this one of the many examples in Nimona of combining old school with futurism, it's also a subtle nod to the mechanical horses of the Middle Ages. These bad girls were invented as a training tool for knights, to prepare and strengthen them for battle, just like this kid is doing. When Nate Knight says on air that First Family Fashion will be on next to discuss what the nobles are wearing this season, that's a little shout out to his voice actor RuPaul, the fierce host of Drag Race. Down on those subway tracks, you'll notice a poster that reads, If you see something, slay something, hanging, a play on see something, say something. Nimona's backstory as they ride the subway is styled like the Mass Transiscope, a 1980s art installation in New York by Bill Brand that uses the principle of animation, much like the zoetropes of old, to create the illusion of movement. You'll notice that Nimona mentions running and swimming with birds, fish, and deer in this scene, and later we get her true backstory recontextualized with these same animals. Now here's a theory. After watching the scene where the 2 knights are arguing over what kind of otter Nimona transforms into, a river otter or a sea otter, Brett believes that this might be because Nimona changes into an ancient otter from 1,000 years ago, before they split into separate species. Remember, comic Nimona says she can only turn into creatures that actually exist, so it's plausible she's reverting to an ancestral otter species from back when she first got her powers. When Nimona becomes a gorilla and slides down the side of a building with one arm, that's a reference to King Kong's signature pose, baby. Next, let's check out those screen names on Ballister's YouTube account. For starters, his username is Ballistar12, but some other things that pop up are Really Royal Party, Moon Sushi Warrior, Wandering Wadham 69, Rising Phoenix 23, Tangerine 1990, Splitting Airs 96, The Millennium Hero, Luscious Locks Lopez, Sir Tandy 711, and finally, Loins of Gold, aka Ambrosius Goldenloin.
Now let's talk about that climax. I've rewatched this like 5 times now, and each time this gets me to ugly cry. All the subtext of Nimona being rejected and othered because of her truth weighs so heavy in today's political climate, where LGBTQ rights seem to be moving backwards. Honestly, I'm so grateful that this movie got made, because so many lonely kids are out there feeling like Nimona. And LGBTQ youths are 4 times as likely to complete suicide than their peers. Just knowing that things get better and that not everyone will see you as a monster is such an important message to send these vulnerable kids. No matter how monstrous the world makes you feel, you have the potential to rise like a phoenix. When Nimona does transform into a phoenix to save the kingdom from becoming collateral damage to the director's single-minded hatred of monsters, she passes this mural of Glorith fighting the dragon. The blocking of this scene has Nimona and her brave self-acceptance take up the heroic role, while the director and her toxic fear is revealed to be the true dragon, the real monster that will destroy our societies. Damn, what an ending. Our last missable detail is small but clever. At the very end of the movie, Nimona somehow returns to life and does a fake-out knock on the lair's door, only to reappear inside, standing right behind Ballister. This is exactly how she introduced herself to him for the first time back at the beginning, implying that a brand new story between the two of them is about to begin. These are just some of the details I noticed in Nimona, but I want to know if there are any that I missed in the comments. Fingers crossed that they make a sequel to this movie at some point in the future, because I'm already jonesing for another shapeshifter crime spree. I'm Scarlet Wit, and you're watching Whitney Vision.